and it is my pleasure to introduce Callie Wright. Today is the first day that I have actually met her, but it is not the first day that I've heard of her. The group at Georgia South, bragged up a couple of weeks ago about the talk that she gave, one of which Callie has described as the best Q&A that she has had. Her talk was like 30 minutes, and then the Q&A was about an hour and a half after that. So that was really awesome, and she is looking forward to seeing more SSA groups participate with GSAs and other acronym groups. She runs a blog and a podcast called the Gaytheist Manifesto, which you guys should totally look up after this. And without further ado, Callie Wright.
Thank you, thank you. Good on audio? Sweet. All right, so my name is Callie Wright. Before I start, I want to dedicate my talk to a friend, John Karp, who passed away yesterday. He was one of the first people to ever tell me that what I do is important. He's a guy who meant a whole lot to me. My podcast is part of the secular media group with Dogma Debate and Secular Sexuality, and he was heavily involved in a lot of ways behind the scenes. So he's someone who meant a lot to me, so this talk's for him. This talk is also for Amos Bede, Caden Clark, Veronica Banks-Cano, Goddess Diamond, Shantae Isaac, Mercedes Successful, Maya Young, Courtney Aduvia, Dawson Yoakum, Candace Johnson, Bianna Blakeney, Jasmine Sierra, Monica Laura, DeMarcus Stansberry, and Reese Walker. These are all trans people who have been murdered so far this year. This talk's for them. So, my name is Callie Wright. I host a podcast called the Gaytheist Manifesto. I also have a blog on Patheos of the same name. I am in fact a queer and transgender woman. I am an activist as well. I do a lot of public speaking. I am a board member for an organization called Heartland Trans Wellness that does services for the trans community in Cincinnati. And I'm the LGBTQ ambassador for the Tri-State Freethinkers. I'm also the biggest Star Trek nerd in the world. Captain Sisko is the best captain. If you disagree, you're incorrect. So the question is, why are we here, right? So I think that secular activism and LGBTQ activism make a whole lot of sense going together. So first I'm going to talk about why, and then we'll talk about how. I don't actually get asked very often why I do the particular kind of activism that I do, and that's because I think on the surface it seems pretty obvious. The religious rights, obviously the #1 barrier to equality for LGBTQ people. This isn't news, so it makes perfect sense for a queer, transgender atheist to fight against the worldview that seeks to marginalize me. We've heard the quotes from Leviticus, from Romans. We've heard God's perfect order, making men and women with their perfect purpose. We all know this stuff, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about that, except to say that yes, it is true that religion is the #1 barrier to equality. And yes, we need to be fighting religious ideology and religious privilege in our society, because everyone, even religious people, are better off when religion doesn't get to make the rules. But it really goes deeper than just that. Even I, as a person who dedicates a specific portion of my life to fighting this fight, I didn't realize at first that it goes a whole lot deeper. Becoming an atheist wasn't a huge deal for me. It was a very intellectual progression. It stopped making sense, so I stopped believing it. None of my Christian friends cared. Even my fundamentalist Christian grandma gave me some half-hearted apologetics, a disappointed look, and that was really it. So I was privileged enough that I didn't have to struggle with or think too hard about my feelings surrounding religion. So fast forward to 2 years ago, when I started getting seriously involved in the atheist movement, I started to hear stories of people's exit from their religious traditions, and I was floored. It was like I was hearing my own story told back to me with religious language as opposed to LGBTQ language. So I'd hear somebody saying like, I can't be honest with my parents about who I am because I'm afraid they'll stop loving me. I'm afraid they'll kick me out of their house. And that phrase can apply equally to a fundamentalist Christian who's lost their faith as it could to a person who is about to reveal that they're gay or they're bi or they're trans. So for these reasons, I think secular people, secular student alliance groups in particular, we need to be working together with LGBT groups on our campuses and our communities to further these goals. The world's still not necessarily the happiest place to be a queer or a trans person, but we are to the point now where we've kind of reached a tipping point where people are comfortable coming out and talking about who they are. And we know that the younger the demographic skews, the more open-minded people generally are. So now I want to talk about the how. So as group organizers and group members, there are 5 things in particular that I've identified that can be done to make our spaces more welcoming. According to a Pew survey, as many as 51% of the LGBTQ community are nuns. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they call themselves atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, whatever, but the fact is they're not religious. And despite this, faith groups do seem to have the monopoly on support for queer and trans people. And I'm not here to say that those things shouldn't exist, because some of those organizations do really important life-saving work. But there are members of our community who just plain won't ever feel comfortable in those spaces. And my purpose here is to make secular groups and secular student alliance groups in particular a welcoming alternative to those groups. As communities, we have a lot in common with one another. Many folks in the LGBTQ community are interested in doing the same things that we are. We don't want religion to have any more power than it does, and indeed would like to see that power wane. And I'm even talking about religious LGBT people who feel this way. So we're interested in serving our communities, we're interested in making friends, getting to know one another, and affecting change in our community. So I definitely think that we need to be working together to further these goals. So number 1, vocabulary. So sometimes it seems like there's an entire language to queer and trans issues, and a lot of ways there is. So the first step here is I'm just going to get you up to speed on some terms that you may hear in these spaces if you want to become a better ally and learn more about the community. And I want to say here that this is by no means an exhaustive list, nor will you find universal agreement on the definitions of these words, but I will say that this is a good place to at least start. So, queer. Queer is a word that has some baggage to it, right? Because anyone who is a little older in our community will realize that this was the go-to slur. But in our communities largely, we've reclaimed the term, and it's simply used as an umbrella term to describe any sexual orientation that isn't hetero. Bisexual. A bisexual person is someone whose romantic and sexual attractions are toward their own gender as well as others. A pansexual person is a person for whom gender is irrelevant to their sexual and romantic attractions. The distinction being that, generally speaking, people who are bisexual do factor gender in, they're just not specific to which ones. For pansexual people, generally, it's irrelevant. Asexual. An asexual person is a person who feels little to no sexual attraction to others. A transgender person is, transgender is an umbrella term to describe a person whose birth assigned sex does not match their gender identity. Cisgender is a person whose gender identity is congruent with their birth assigned sex. In other words, not transgender. Non-binary is a term used to describe those who identify outside of the male-female gender binary. Some words you may hear in reference to non-binary people: genderqueer, bigender, gender fluid, etc. Intersex, a term used to describe a variety of conditions in which a person is born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definition of male-female. And safe space. This is a word that there's a whole lot of fun in the atheist community surrounding. But what it simply is a place where measures have been taken to assure that members of marginalized groups won't face harassment or discrimination. So I want to talk for just a quick second about labels. And a lot of times when you start throwing these terms around, what you hear is, well, why all the labels? We're all just people. Why are you creating divisions? And I'm here to tell you that the day I found out there was a label for my gender identity was the happiest day of my life. Because it meant there were other people like me. It meant there was a definition, there was a concept. It meant something. I wasn't the only one. The problem comes when we create boxes from labels to shove people into. That's what we don't want to do. 2, we want to talk about pronouns. Pronouns are my favorite. So I want to do a quick thought experiment. I present for your consideration a puppy. There it is. Oh. So when you meet a puppy, unless you're a terrible black-hearted human being, your reaction probably will be something along the lines of remarking on how adorable the puppy is and asking the puppy's name, i.e., so cute, what's his name? To which the puppy's human will nonchalantly respond with the puppy's name and very gently in an offhand way correct you if you made the wrong assumption about the puppy's sex. Oh, she's a girl, her name's Cora. To which, of course, you will respond, I'm going to have to inspect the puppy's genitalia before we can move on. Except, of course, because you're not a terrible person, your response in actuality will probably be a quick apology and to just move on with your life. So the point being, some people in our society care more about getting a puppy's pronouns right than they do a trans person's. So when we correct someone, this is the reaction we get. We are often met with suspicion, derision, rude comments, and an outright refusal to respect our identities and the way we prefer to be addressed. So, it's just to make a quick point of what we're up against here. So, we're all familiar with the pronouns that most people use, he, him, his, she, her, her. But I'm sure some of you at least are aware those aren't the only pronouns. There are gender-neutral pronouns that some people feel better fit their identity. There's a quick list of some that you may run into. They, them, theirs, and the rest. So pronouns matter, and here's why. So for most folks, pronouns are just a facet of the English language, right? She covers basically anyone who looks stereotypically feminine. He covers basically anyone who looks stereotypically masculine. But for trans people, it's a different concept entirely. And I don't want to act as if I can speak on behalf of all trans people, but I think it's safe to say that if you've taken the step to ask someone to use pronouns that are different from the ones you grew up with or the ones that you were assigned at birth, it's a thing that really matters. Some of us have to struggle very, very hard to have our identities recognized by those around us. It sometimes means a lifelong struggle fraught with depression, anxiety, fear, self-loathing, and hateful opposition from friends, loved ones, peers, and society in general. When you use someone's correct pronoun, you're affirming to that person that you recognize them as they identify and that you simply respect them as who they report themselves to be. So the question is, how does this apply practically to someone who's running a group? So there are a couple of things that you can do. The first is to make it standard practice to introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns. Hi, my name's Callie. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Very simple. Do this before you know there are trans people in your midst. That way, once people show up, they see this as simply the regular order of business, and they will know before you've said anything that you've put thought into making them feel welcome in your space. Don't be afraid to ask people their pronouns. And I can't promise you that you'll never, ever, ever offend someone by refusing to assume their gender, but you'll be much better off not assuming. And if you're not comfortable asking, you can use positive identifiers. You with the face, you with the blue shirt, like, it's easy stuff. And then the other thing too is make an effort to get it right, and don't freak out if you get it wrong. Because you're going to get them wrong, sometimes. I spend most of my life telling about this stuff, and I still screw it up. So don't beat yourself up over making mistakes. You can very quickly correct yourself, apologize, and move on. Has anyone ever seen an uncomfortable apology before? I'm so sorry. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry. You're uncomfortable already, right? Yeah, don't do that. So the third thing is to check your assumptions, okay? We all know what they say about assumptions, but everyone makes them, and I am no exception to that rule. So to make my point here, I'm going to play a game, get a little crowd participation going. I'm going to present a series of questions, and I want you all to tell me what assumptions I'm making when I ask you these questions. If I ask someone, do you have a boyfriend? What assumptions does that question have built into it? Anybody?
That you're attracted to men.
There, one. Take it? Okay.
Yeah, that you have any sexual attraction at all.
Yeah!
That you even want a boyfriend?
Perfect. You nailed all the ones that I ever thought of. So, awesome. So instead, you can ask, are you single? Are you in a relationship? Very, very easy shift in language. If I ask you, are you a guy or a girl? I heard the groans. What assumptions does that question make? There you go.
So one of the words has an age connotation and the other doesn't so much. So there's age related.
That's great. I didn't even think about that, but that's a great call out. Anybody else?
But they're comfortable telling you that.
That's good. That's good. There's one big one.
Gender binary.
Yep. There's a big one. There's a big one that's being missed. That it's any of your fucking business. Oh, did you say it?
Yes.
Oh, there you go. There you go. So you can just ask someone, what are your pronouns? You don't want to obligate people to tell you the intricacies of their identity. You let someone tell you that if they prefer to do so. It's very easy. And so the idea here is that if you make assumptions based on someone's outward appearance, there's a healthy chance you're going to eventually be wrong. Now, we all know that some level of assumption is necessary for life, right? So I'm not saying if you ever make assumptions that you're a bad person and you should feel bad. But the idea is that we don't want to let our expectations and what we see most of the time surrounding gender and sexuality, we don't want to let those things become boxes that we shove people into. So the fourth step is to be careful with questions. So for this portion, I'm going to need a volunteer, a brave volunteer. Anybody?
Okay.
Are your boobs real?
Wait, mine or his?
That was a perfect response. That was beautiful. Thank you. That was awesome. So the idea here, you just want to be careful with the questions you ask people. You don't want to ask someone what their genitals are like or anything like that, because it's none of your business. It doesn't, unless you plan on having sex with them, which is an entirely another conversation. But the other thing is, don't tokenize, right? When we want to be inclusive, right? We want to be diverse. We want to bring diversity to our movement. But one of the things that you see oftentimes is people, oh my God, there's a black person here. We've got our black person, we've got our trans person, we've got our gay person, and then you just get dogpiled. And not everyone is there to be that person, right? I make myself that person because I have these conversations. I'm fine with it. Not everyone is that way. So just don't feel entitled to the time and energy of people. Just make them part of the group. And the fifth and final step is I just want to talk about allyship. And this is more on a personal level, what we can do to be better allies to queer and trans people. And we could talk about allyship a lot. Stephanie's talk, which is right after mine, which you should definitely see because she's amazing. If my talk's the 101, hers is the 201, so you definitely want to go if this is interesting stuff to you. But on a very broad, general level, the two most important parts of allyship in my mind is that one, you want to make sure that your allyship is informed by what the community actually wants. Good example, in Cincinnati, after Leila Alcorn's suicide, a guy decided that he wanted to adopt a highway in her name. It's a great sentiment, but he raised a whole bunch of money to do it that a trans support organization could have used to get a trans person services. So, the idea is you want to listen to what the community actually wants. And you're not going to find that every trans person or that every gay person agrees on what's needed. And in each different community geographically, you'll find that people have different wants and needs. But the point is, you want your activism to be informed by those views. And then the second is simply to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because a lot of this is confronting privilege, it's confronting ignorance, and those things are super uncomfortable. Very, very, very uncomfortable. And we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable if this is an end that we want to pursue. So that's my talk. That's my contact information, my Patreon, because I wouldn't be able to do this kind of stuff without my patrons. Shameless plug. Yeah, thank you all so much. This actually ended a little bit earlier, so I've got 5 minutes. So if anybody has questions. Yeah.
So for the sake of brief summarization, just don't be an ass. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, but the problem is most people who are asses don't realize they are.
Okay. You can ask, apologize, and try not to do it too much and do something.
Well, that's the idea, right? The idea is to not think that it's the end of the world if you make a mistake, right?
Okay.
And part of it is on us to create spaces where, like, we're not dogpiling people and attacking people for making simple, earnest, well-intentioned mistakes, right?
We get something from this talk, and then I just blurt out something that might be inappropriate in certain circumstances, and somebody gets annoyed by it. If I were to just apologize and just correct the mistake.
Generally speaking, you'll find that's the right thing to do. Like I said, I can't speak for everyone, but generally speaking, a quick apology, correcting yourself, and making an effort to do better is really all that's necessary. Yeah?
On that note, I think a lot of it's breaking repetition too. If I see a group of people, hey guys, what's up? And I've probably done it in your presence before, and I catch myself, and instead of saying apologize, I just move on. But it's breaking repetitions and recognizing your environment. So we're all guilty of it.
Yep. Yeah, there's no perfect social justice warrior. Like I said, like, I spend almost all of my waking life outside of my day job doing this, and I still do it. So, like, nobody's ever perfect, and no one should be expected to be. All I ask is that people make an honest effort. Yeah.
This is kind of more towards like the SSA aspect of like how, like, this is I guess the $1 million question in like the atheist community, but like do you have suggestions for how to go about having safe spaces without starting debates about safe space? Like, because every time that we try to bring it up and we're like, this is a safe space, we get like eye rolls, and then it's like, we're gonna do pronouns, and we get people who are like, my least favorite pronoun is it, and it's like, all right, well, calm down. Like, do you just have any suggestions for like dealing with like shitty atheists when you're trying to be nice to people? Well,
there's a couple of things, and there's a difference in approaches, right? Different approaches work well in different situations, and different people react well to different approaches. Like, not to put her on the spot, but Stephanie and I have very radically different approaches to how we approach conversations. They're both effective in certain situations, right? So I think, awesome. So I don't know, were you here for the last talk? Because I think what she was talking about, how you get to know and interact with people, like, like where you want to make at least some effort to get to know where people are coming from, because you can't really change their minds if you don't understand exactly where their minds are at, if that makes sense. Yeah.
When I screw up, there's usually a microphone in front of my face. And I hear about it from 250 people.
Right.
And so I'm wondering. One example is I think probably about a month ago I used the term born male, and several people were like, no, assigned male at birth is the proper way to address that. And I was like, oh shit, okay, I get it now. So from moving forward, I used that phrase, but then I still caught myself saying born male again. No, I mean assigned male at birth, and I was correcting my mistakes live on air. And then at one point, I think I was writing something, and I was just texting Stephanie like, okay, I get trans woman and trans man, but what if I want to say like trans people? Is that offensive? Is that okay? She's like, well, it's two separate words, don't put them together. And I was like,
right.
My question is there an online like catalog of some of these things so that I can deal with my stupid in private?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. No, you're good.
It'd be great to have a resource to go to.
Can I add a question to his real quick, since they kind of connect?
Yeah.
If you don't mind. And I just throw out things as well, so if anybody wants to correct me, that's fine. But there's a lot of confusion that comes into trying to address things. For example, we had a discussion earlier before your talk.
Yeah.
That I was trying to talk about the LGBTQA plus. I don't know all of the terms that go
right.
But at the same time, people use different terms for different things, and like you said, there's a lot of confusion. How does one? Is it just important to be mindful in that regard, or?
Yes, and that's really the thing, because like I said, you're not going to find everyone, even within the same community, agreeing with those things, but you're going to get it right a lot more than you're going to get it wrong if what you are doing is informed by them, right?
Okay.